All right, so we're in the last week of looking at the book of Esther, which, as I've said in other weeks, Esther is one of the great Jewish history heroes of the Jewish faith, right? That they literally, even though this happened like 2,400 years ago, we're going to see at the end of today that they launched a holiday every year called Purim, that they celebrate to this day. Jewish people celebrate this holiday to this day. It's massively popular, and it includes a public reading of the entire book, all 10 chapters. They read it out loud, and everybody brings like noisemakers and horns and stuff, and every time they say Mordecai or Esther's name, everybody like goes wild and cheers through the whole thing, and every time they say Haman's name, everybody's like, boo, and it's got to be super distracting to try and be the one reading it when everybody's freaking out like that. But if you remember, we ended last week kind of with like an Empire Strikes Back cliffhanger moment, right? The bad guys are winning. Esther has started her plan to try and save her people, and she had invited the king and Haman to a banquet, and she had her first banquet, and the king's like, please, whatever it is you want, I'll give it to you up to half the kingdom. Just tell me what you want. And Esther goes, what I want is for you and Haman to come to another banquet that I'm going to do tomorrow, right? And she's like pacing out. She's setting the stage to really guarantee that he's going to say what she wants him to say. But what she doesn't realize is Haman is getting more and more mad at Mordecai. And where we left off last week is Haman went home and he was so mad at Mordecai, he built a massive stake, a massive pole that he was going to have Mordecai impaled on the next day and killed, and then his body would just be on display for everyone to see. Don't mess with Haman. And the Bible says it was 75 feet tall. Scholars aren't sure if it was actually 75 feet or if they were just saying a massive number so that you would get the idea. This pole is going to be high enough that anyone in the city will see this body dangling up in the air wherever they. It's kind of morbid, right? And that's where it ended. What? Man, why are you asking questions like that? I'm saying they might have exaggerated the number a little bit, but the point was they were gonna impale him super high so that people could see. Probably with a slightly higher pole that they then take down. I don't know, big ladder, whatever. I wasn't there. All I know is where we left off is Esther might be moving a little too slow. She might save her people, but Mordecai might die. It was a huge cliffhanger. And maybe Empire Strikes Back was too old of a movie. That was the most offensive part in that one Spider-Man scene where he was like, that really old movie in Star Wars with the things and then knocked down? And I was like, you son of a gun. A more recent movie would have been like the end of Infinity War, where it seems like Thanos has won, right? But what's the key to every great hero story? A massive reversal, an unexpected reversal where the heroes prevail. And that's what today is all about. So let's dive in. Oh, yeah, see? Big reversal. I got a reverse card. In Esther chapter 6, verses 6 through 10, it starts off, and here's, to set the stage, it's the next day. Or no, it's later that night. Haman is all agitated. He wants to get Mordecai. But meanwhile, something happens with the king. The king goes to bed, but he can't go to sleep. And what do you do if you can't go to sleep? You go to sleep? Who said that? I want to slap you. You get on the phone? How's that going to help you go to sleep? Oh, okay. You just try. Here was King Xerxes' plan to get himself to go to sleep. He brought his attendant in and said, hey, start reading back the history of my reign as king. He was like, just talk to me about me until I fall asleep. And they start reading back the history, and they note that earlier on in his reign, Mordecai had discovered a plot to assassinate King Xerxes. And so Xerxes goes, wait a minute, did we ever do anything to honor Mordecai? And the attendants are looking and they go, no, we didn't. Now this actually in the culture would have been a huge shame to King Xerxes, that somebody would have saved his life and he hadn't done anything to honor them or celebrate. So he goes, oh man, we gotta do something about that. He goes, I need some ideas. And they heard there was someone outside. It was Haman. Haman showed up. Haman couldn't wait until the next day to ask Xerxes if he could kill Mordecai. So Haman shows up because he's going to ask the king, hey, king, if you're awake anyways, is it cool if I kill Mordecai on a giant stake tomorrow, right? He doesn't know King Xerxes has just realized he never honored Mordecai. So here's where we pick up. So Haman came in. The king invites him in. You got to help me out, figure this out. So Haman came in, and the king said, what should I do to honor a man who truly pleases me? Haman thought to himself, whom would the king wish to honor more than me? So he replied, he's an arrogant son of a gun. So he replied, if the king wishes to honor someone, he should bring out one of the king's own royal robes, as well as a horse that the king himself has ridden, one with the royal emblem on its head. They would actually make like a throne for the horse. Basically, here's the deal. What Haman is suggesting is wildly unusual. Like, it wouldn't be unusual to honor someone, put some special clothes on them, put them on a special horse and stuff, but to wear the king's robe, ride the king's horse, which was literally viewed as almost like a portable throne, right? And the robes were viewed as a part of the king. They weren't just like some of the king's clothes. He was essentially going, hey, you should treat this person like the king. You should make him like it. A lot of people kind of look at this and go, Haman isn't satisfied with being the number 2 dude in all the land. He wants to be king, and he's pretending like he doesn't think this is for him, and he's going, oh, you should make this guy like a king. Well, he continues in verse 9. He says, let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials, and let him see that the man who the king wishes to honor is dressed in the king's robes and led through the city square on the king's horse. Have the official, this noble, shout as they go, this is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor. Excellent, the king said to Haman. Quick, take the robes and my horse and do just as you have said for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the gate of the palace. Leave out nothing you have suggested. Can you imagine how Haman reacted to this news? The one person in the entire nation that there was nobody he would have been more upset at the idea. Like, already we're starting to see the first of some of the reversals, right? And even though God isn't mentioned, like, we kind of get, man, God is working something behind the scenes to arrange this timing. So poor Haman goes out. You almost feel bad for the guy until you remember, no, this is the guy that wanted to do genocide and execute every single Jewish person that existed because he didn't like one of them, right? Like, not a great guy. So he has to lead Mordecai around, cheering about how he's the greatest. It says in verse 12, when it ended, after he had done this, Haman hurried home, dejected and completely humiliated. In fact, he gets home, and his wife and his friends who before had been giving him they were the ones that were like, hey, you should just kill Mordecai now. They even say to him, whoa, you got to back off, man. You have got to back off. The king just honored this guy. He just walked it. If you keep trying to get revenge on Mordecai, it's going to cost you your life. Like, this has gone too far in Mordecai's favor. And while they're telling him that, the king's eunuchs show up. You know those guys. We already talked about what a eunuch is. We don't need to go over that again, right? Right. What? What? All right. The king's eunuchs show up, and they say, hey, Haman, it's time for the second banquet. Let's go. So Haman gets rushed off with them to the next banquet. So he's thinking, hey, at least, like, I still got this going for me. On this second occasion, the second banquet, while they were drinking wine, the king again said to Esther, tell me what you want, Queen Esther. What is your request? I will give it to you even if it's half the kingdom. Esther's kind of brilliant. Because if you look back now, over the course of this book, this is now the third different occasion where she gets the king to say this to her multiple times. And he's a very emotional guy. He's not a rational guy. And so, like, having him commit to whatever it is you say you want, I'm going to do, over and over and over on all these different occasions, really sets the stage for when she says it, he's got to say yes, right? Queen Esther replied, if I have found favor with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request, I ask that my life and the lives of my people be spared. For my people and I have been sold to those who would kill, slaughter, and annihilate us. If we had merely been sold as slaves, I could remain quiet, for that would be too trivial a matter to warrant disturbing the king. Which is kind of a weird thing to say, because on the one hand, she was kind of a slave, right? Like she was taken in against her will and all that. But also the language she's using here when she does this frames this as this isn't just genocide. This is a treasonous act on the king. She's going, this is worse than if somebody had sold my people into slavery, which would have meant selling the king's property to another nation, which is a treasonous act. So she's already kind of setting the stage. She's not saying what is. She's not putting any blame on King Xerxes, even though he's the one that signed off on it. You're going to see that she's really careful to give the king an out. This is Haman's fault, right? So she paints this whole picture. It's a treasonous thing. This is all news to the king. The king has never, up till today, this moment, connected the dots that Esther is a Jew. Haman, on the other hand, has to be getting nervous. Right? Like, how many ethnic groups are on the verge of being killed and wiped out? One, the Jewish people. And he's the one that did it. And there has to be like this moment of no. Wait, no, what? No, she's not. The king didn't. Oh, crap. Right? Like his stomach's starting to get, like you get super stressed out and you're like, diarrhea. Like, Haman's not having a good moment. This is a really bad day. And so it just gets worse. It says, who would do such a thing? King Xerxes demanded. Who would be so presumptuous as to touch you? Esther replied, this wicked Haman. Like if you have ever had a horrible moment in your life, all of your horrible moments added up together are not as bad as what Haman was feeling in this moment. And I don't feel bad for him because he wanted to commit genocide. He's not a nice guy. This wicked Haman is our adversary and our enemy. Haman grew pale with fright before the king and queen. Then the king jumped to his feet in a rage and went out into the palace garden. The king hears, this dude wants to kill my wife, I'm out. And he leaves her alone with him, which is kind of weird, right? But it was probably, he's been drinking, he might be a little buzzed, his brain is like processing things a little slow. He wanted some fresh air to process what is it that I am hearing in this moment. Now, Haman does something weird, right? And Haman gets, in this moment, he knows, this is the emotional king, I'm dead. There's no changing his mind at this point. The king is livid. His one shot, maybe I can talk Esther into backing down. Like maybe if she gets on my side, maybe she can change his mind. So Haman, however, stayed behind to plead for his life with Queen Esther, for he knew that the king intended to kill him. In despair, he fell on the couch. Like he's in such a panic and frenzy that this word felt like he fell. As he went to go beg for his life from her, he tripped and fell on the couch where Queen Esther was reclining. So she's reclining back. He falls on there just as the king is coming back in. He's stormed out. He's storming back in just as he falls. Now you think, what's the big deal about having him fall? However he fell, it created some sort of awkward visual about what it was that he was attempting to do to the queen in that moment, right? Whatever it was, it looked wrong because the king, it says, the king exclaimed, will he even assault the queen right here in the palace before my very eyes? He's going, are you going to try and assault her right in front of me? Now here's the deal. We hear assault and we think like, was he trying to punch her? Was he trying to kill her? Was he trying to? No. Another way to translate that word assault is molest or ravish. Like however he fell, it could be taken as a form of sexual advance, right? And the king goes, are you seriously trying to do that to her right now, right in front of me, right after I learned what I just learned? Right now, were you serious, bro? No, that's not what he said. Over here trying to translate it into Gen Z nitwick speak. And as soon as the king spoke, his attendants covered Haman's face, signaling his doom. It's like, you are no longer worthy to have your eyeballs viewing the king. You're dead, right? Like, you are a dead man. It just hasn't happened yet. Now, here's the best part. One of the king's eunuchs, who up to this point has not meant, like, he clearly knew about this, but before, Haman was the one with all the power, so he wasn't ratting out Haman. But Harbona goes like, I know whose side I need to be on now. He goes, one of the king's eunuchs said, hey, by the way, Haman has set up a sharpened pole that stands 75 feet tall in his own courtyard. He intended to use it to impale Mordecai, the man who saved the king from assassination. He's like, by the way, then impale Haman on it, the king ordered. So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai, and the king's anger subsided, right? Another little bit of a delicious reversal right there, a little bit of irony. He erected the pole that he gets killed on. Now, here's the deal. Haman, is the villain, is executed, and he deserved death. The crazy thing is, he died for the one thing he didn't actually do, right? Like, he was not actually attempting to assault Queen Esther in that moment. But most people, I was reading a bunch of different commentaries on this. Most scholars think the king was not so gullible as to think that's what was actually happening in that moment. Most of them think that what the king did is when he came back and he saw Haman fall, it gave him the perfect out. Because if he says, we need to execute him because he was trying to kill my wife and all the people, somebody might go, yeah, but he couldn't do that without you signing off on it, right? Like, that's awkward. It's an awkward conversation. The king doesn't like that. This gave him perfect out. Now he can, this is another treasonous act, going after the king's wife. Because that wasn't just like a form of sexual assault. That was also how you would try to become the king, is take the king's wives. And so this gave Haman the perfect out to, I'm going to execute him for trying to kill my wife and her people, but I'm going to say it was for this assault, and now we don't even have to talk about that other thing that I was kind of a part of, right? He thinks it's done, happily ever after, right? Except, and the king, like, he's like, this is cool. He even says to Esther, you can have all of Haman's stuff. You get his home, his house, his property, all of his stuff, whatever. It's great. But just because Haman's dead doesn't change the fact that the king had made this decree saying that everyone on March 7th could go out and kill Jews and keep all of their property after they kill them. The men, the women, children. That's still out there. The threat is still going. The king doesn't care about the people. He just cares about the person that offended and embarrassed him. So he, like, to him, that's still a non-issue, whatever the Jews die. Esther is going, this thing is still not over. So she goes back in front of the king again, risks being executed again, right, by appearing unbidden. He puts out the scepter, lets her touch it, says, hey, what do you want? And she says in verse 9 of chapter 8, if it pleases the king, and if I have found favor with him, and if he thinks it's right, and if I'm pleasing to him, let there be a decree that reverses the orders of Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, who ordered that the Jews throughout all the king's provinces should be destroyed. She's still putting all the blame on Haman. For how can I endure to see my people and my family slaughtered and destroyed? Then King Xerxes said to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, I've given Esther the property of Haman. He's been impaled on a pole because he tried to destroy the Jews. He's like defensive. He's going, look, I already took care of it. It's over. We got the revenge. He doesn't care about these people, but then he like, whatever. Now go ahead and send a message to the Jews in the king's name, telling them whatever you want, and seal it with the king's signet ring. But remember that whatever has already been written in the king's name and sealed with his signet ring can never be revoked. He's going, look, here's the deal. Even I don't have the power to undo my decree that I made before. That decree still stands. No matter what they do, the law will still say Jews can be killed on March 7th, and all of their stuff can be kept by whoever kills them. So Mordecai writes up a replacement decree. Since the king has said, just write up whatever you want, I'll sign it, come up with something. So Mordecai writes this replacement decree that essentially says all of the Jews can unite up which normally would be viewed as like, are they forming a rebellion? And they can arm themselves. And if anybody comes at them, they can kill them. Like they can fight back. And he sends that out everywhere. And actually, people received it really well. And Mordecai wrote out that, on March 7th when that happens. And so, when that day actually did come, there was some fighting. Some people did try. The Jews fought back. They killed them. They, survived and all that. And so it says in verse 16, when this decree was sent out all over the land, everywhere, the Jews were filled with joy and gladness and were honored everywhere. In every province and city, wherever the king's decree arrived, the Jews rejoiced and had a great celebration and declared a public festival and holiday. That's when they launched the holiday of Purim, to celebrate Esther every year to this day. And so then March 7th came. The Jews did fight back. They defended themselves against some people that tried to risk it anyways. But the people as a whole were preserved and protected because Esther risked her life and moved ahead. So, the last two chapters, 9 and 10, we're not going to read those. Those kind of describe that fighting, but also how the holiday is set up and structured that they celebrate to this day. Here's the deal. Why do we still celebrate this story? Why do the Jewish people still celebrate it every year? Why do we talk about it? Why is Esther one of the great heroes of the Christian faith as well? Even though this story is more than 2,000 years old, I think it's got a couple big truths overall from the whole book that we can learn from. And the first is this, that God is in control. God's in control. The biggest lesson in Esther. Here's the fascinating thing. You might not have noticed this, right? Because we just assume when we read the Bible. But if you go through the book of Esther and look for it, it's just about, I believe, the only book in the Bible that never once directly mentions God. Never once. In fact, centuries ago, when they were arguing over what book should be in the Bible, that was a big reason that some people were like, this doesn't belong in the Bible. God's not even mentioned in it. But the counter argument was, how do you not see God in this story, right? All throughout the story, God is working. He's placing Esther in the right place to save her people. He arranges the timing so that when Haman thinks he's making his big move, actually Mordecai is the one that is the hero and is saved. That Mordecai and Esther have this opportunity to write the counter decree that saves the people. All of these different things, even though God is unseen, it becomes very clear when we look at it after the fact that God orchestrated everything. He used Esther's tragedy to put her in a place to save her people. All of those reversals that look like coincidences were God working. In Ecclesiastes 3:11, it says, "Yet God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He has planted eternity in the human heart, but even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end." I love that last phrase there, right? That we don't see the whole scope of what God is doing. When my oldest son, Micah, was little, when he was like a few years old once, he got really sick. Not this Micah, my Micah. He got really sick, and he had to go to the emergency room. And it was getting worse, and so they needed to like give him some shots and put some, and he was like panicking. You know how like a 3-year-old can like just freak out and like spaz and go, and he was panicking, and his eyes looked horrified, and he was screaming, and he looked to me for help, like, "Dad, rescue me from these monsters that are trying to hurt me." And you know what I did? I pinned him down so they could do horrible things to him. It's probably why he's had an attitude ever since. No, right? 3-year-old Micah did not understand that what the doctors were doing was actually helping him, right? In his perspective, this is just a horrible situation. I feel horrible. I feel bad. I feel sick. I'm panicking. And on top of that, all the adults that should be nice are making things worse. Now he's 21. Like, I don't have to pin him down for the doctor because he understands, even though sometimes what a doctor does hurts, the bigger scope, the bigger picture is that it's helping him. It's kind of the same way with God. Like, sometimes we go through horrible moments, and from our perspective, we don't have the full scope. From our perspective, it's really bad. But God is going like, no, you don't understand. I'm going to use this pain to do something so much better, so much more beautiful. And so part of following God, part of our lesson from Esther is remembering that even when it doesn't feel like it, God is in control. The second fill-in on your paper is obey God. And I don't know about you guys. Sometimes I get tense about the word obey. Truett, is this stuff out in the... Okay, fine. Thank you. Sometimes I'm not a big fan of the word obey. It sounds like, obey. I'm not very good at it, right? But here's the deal. Our pride doesn't like it. We want to be in control of our own lives, but following God means letting him be in control. In John 14:15, it says, if you love me, obey my commandments. And part of the reason why Esther is a hero is because she obeyed God. Even though God isn't directly referenced, right, we see her calling for a fast, which they would have understood as, hey, we need to pray for 3 days. We need to turn to God. She knew what God wanted her to do, and she did it, even though it was hard. She battled evil, advocated for justice, spoke up for those who were in danger. One of the most convicting verses in the Bible to me is in James 4:17, where it says, remember, it is a sin to know what you ought to do and then not do it, right? Like if I know the right thing to do and I choose not to do it, that's a sin. God's going, if you know what's right to do and you don't do it, like you don't need to wait for someone to tell you. You don't need for my voice to come out of the clouds saying, do this right thing. If you know the right thing to do, then do it. And we show our love to God when we obey, not just when we're directly told, but when we know what the right thing to do and do it. Even when it's hard, right? Whatever we're facing in school, at home, our neighborhood, at work, on sports team, whatever the situation is, if we know the right thing to do, we need to be like Esther and display that kind of courage and obedience to God and obey him. Got it? That was a weird got it. Let me pray. And then you guys can grab a bag of candy and a snowball on your way out. They're out there. I'm going to pray. Right now, the middle schoolers are taking them all. So I know, I'm trying to, but we keep talking because Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for your word. We thank you so much for the story of Esther and what a hero she is and all that we can learn from her life and her story, and we thank you for preserving that. God, we ask that you would help us to always remember you're in control, even when it doesn't feel like it, even when we're overwhelmed. God, we ask that you give us the courage and the strength to obey you the way Esther did. In your name, amen.